David pressed his face against the transport window and watched the alien city grow larger below him. The buildings looked like giant crystals sprouting from the ground, each one glowing with soft purple light.
He had dreamed of this moment for 3 years.
Ever since the first alien contact changed everything on Earth. Now he was actually here on Centus, ready to become the first human student at their famous science school. The transport landed with a gentle bump. David grabbed his single bag and stepped out into air that smelled like flowers and electricity. Other students moved around him, but none looked remotely human. A creature that looked like a walking stick insect chittered at him in what might have been a greeting. David smiled and nodded, not sure what else to do. The Galactic Institute of Biological Sciences rose before him like a mountain made of glass and light. David had studied pictures of it, but seeing it in person made his legs feel weak. Students floated, crawled, and walked up the main path in dozens of different ways. Some had wings, others had too many legs, and a few seemed to be made of living gas that held roughly humanoid shapes. Inside the main building, David found the registration desk. The being behind it had skin like polished stone and 6 eyes arranged in a perfect circle around its head. It spoke through a small device that translated its words into English. "David Chen from Sol 3, it said, consulting a glowing tablet. "You are the human exchange student. Very interesting. Your dormitory assignment is in the low-gravity section, room 847. Classes begin tomorrow." David thanked the creature and made his way through halls filled with the strangest sights he had ever seen. Students hung from the ceiling, others moved through tubes filled with liquid, and some seemed to phase in and out of solid matter. He felt like he was walking through someone else's dream. His room was small but comfortable, with a bed that adjusted to his body and a window that looked out over the alien city. David unpacked his few belongings and tried to calm his nerves. Tomorrow he would attend his first class, Advanced Xenobiology. He had chosen it because he wanted to learn about life throughout the galaxy. The next morning, David made his way to the lecture hall. It was a massive space with seats arranged in a complex pattern that accommodated dozens of different body types. He chose a seat in the back and watched as his classmates filed in. A creature that looked like a praying mantis made of blue crystal sat near him. It turned several eyes in his direction and spoke through a translator. "You are the primitive species from the Outer Rim," it said. Its voice sounded like wind chimes. "I am Prism of the Shimmery. Your planet is very far from civilization." Before David could respond, another student approached. This one looked more like an insect, with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected rainbow colors. "Do not be rude to our new classmate," the insect creature said to Prism. "I am Chirik of the Vrick Collective. We have heard much about humans. Your species has only recently achieved faster-than-light travel, yes?" David nodded. "That's right. We're still pretty new to all this." Chirik's antennae twitched in what might have been sympathy. "Do not worry. Most species take many centuries to develop proper civilization after achieving spaceflight. Your people will learn." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their professor. The being that entered was tall and graceful, with pale blue skin and silver hair that seemed to move on its own. Its limbs were longer than human proportions, giving it an ethereal appearance. "Welcome to Advanced Xenobiology," the professor said. Its voice was soft but carried clearly through the hall. "I am Professor Kellen of the Etherian Republic. This semester we will study one of the most fascinating and terrifying aspects of life in our galaxy, the apex predators of Deathworlds." A murmur ran through the class. David noticed several students shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Professor Kellen continued, "For those who may not know, Deathworlds are planets with environmental conditions so hostile that they produce the most dangerous life forms in known space. High gravity, extreme weather, aggressive ecosystems, and constant evolutionary pressure create creatures that exist nowhere else." The professor activated a holographic display that showed a rotating planet covered in green and blue. "This is a typical Deathworld. Notice the dense atmosphere, the vast oceans, and the extreme weather patterns. Such worlds are rare, making up less than 1% of habitable planets. But they produce evolutionary adaptations that challenge our understanding of what life can become." David looked at the hologram and realized with a start that it looked almost exactly like Earth, though the continents were arranged differently. He glanced around at his classmates and saw expressions of horror and fascination on their alien faces. Your assignment for this semester, Professor Kellen announced, will be to research and present on a specific Deathworld predator species. You will study their hunting methods, social structures, and evolutionary adaptations. This will help you understand how extreme environments shape life in ways that seem impossible to those of us from more civilized worlds. Chirrut leaned over to David. I hope I get assigned something from a water world, he whispered. I have heard the aquatic predators are less disturbing than the land-based ones. Professor Kellen began calling out assignments. Chirrut of the Vrick, you will study the apex predators of Aquanus. Prism of the Shimari, you have the shadow hunters of Umbros. When the professor reached David's name, the entire class turned to look at him. David Chen of Sol 3, Professor Kellen said, you will study the theoretical apex predators of Sol 3 itself. Since your homeworld is classified as a garden world, this will give you interesting insight into what your planet might have produced under more hostile conditions. David felt his heart skip a beat. He managed to keep his expression neutral as he nodded. That sounds very interesting, Professor. After class, David walked back to his dormitory in a daze. His classmates chatted excitedly about their assignments, but their enthusiasm was mixed with obvious dread. I heard that some students need psychological counseling after studying Deathworld predators, Prism said, its crystalline body shimmering with nervous energy. The concepts are so alien to civilized minds. At least David got the easy assignment, Chirrut added. Studying theoretical creatures from a garden world should be much less disturbing than dealing with real Deathworld monsters. David smiled and agreed, but inside his mind was racing. He had a terrible suspicion that his easy assignment was going to be far more complicated than anyone realized. Earth was no garden world, and humans were definitely not theoretical creatures. He spent that evening accessing the Galactic database, curious to see what the aliens actually knew about his homeworld and his species. What he found made his blood run cold and filled him with a mixture of amusement and terror. According to the galaxy's official records, Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, the highest danger rating possible. The lecture hall felt different today. David noticed how his classmates sat farther apart than usual, their conversations quieter and more nervous. Professor Kellen had promised to begin their detailed study of Deathworld predators, and the anticipation filled the room like a thick fog. Professor Kellen glided to the front of the class, carrying a device that projected holographic images. Today we begin our examination of the most feared creatures in the galaxy, the professor said. Before we look at specific species, we must understand what makes Deathworld predators so extraordinary. The first hologram appeared above them. It showed a four-legged creature with thick fur running across an endless plain. David recognized it immediately as a wolf, though the database had labeled it as Canis lupus, theoretical pack hunter from Deathworld designation Kepler 442b. Observe this creature, Professor Kellen said. Notice the forward-facing eyes indicating a pure predator. The lean build suggests it can maintain pursuit over vast distances. Most disturbing of all, notice how it hunts in coordinated groups. Chirrut's translator buzzed with distress sounds. How can they coordinate without technological communication? That is exactly what makes Deathworld predators so terrifying, Professor Kellen replied. They develop organic solutions to problems that civilized species solve with technology. This particular creature can pursue prey for dozens of kilometers without stopping. Their victims literally run until their hearts give out from exhaustion. A student near the front made a sound like breaking glass. That is horrible. Why would evolution create something so cruel? David bit his tongue to keep from mentioning that wolves were actually quite merciful compared to some Earth predators. He remembered his grandfather telling stories about hunting with his friends, how they would track deer through the mountains for hours. The old man had always spoken with respect about both the hunt and the prey. The hologram changed to show underwater scenes. David saw great white sharks gliding through blue water, their sleek bodies moving with perfect efficiency. Aquatic Deathworld predators present different challenges, Professor Kellen explained. This creature can detect electrical impulses from other life forms. It can smell a single drop of blood from several kilometers away. Its bite force exceeds anything found on civilized worlds. Chirrut stood up suddenly, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic light. I request permission to leave, he said, his voice shaking through the translator. I cannot process this information without becoming ill. Professor Kellen nodded sympathetically. Of course. Please report to the counseling center. They have specialists trained to help with Deathworld exposure trauma. As Chirik hurried from the room, David felt a pang of guilt. These were just normal Earth animals to him, but they were giving his friend nightmares. He watched the great white shark footage and remembered the documentary he had seen just last month about shark conservation efforts. The truly remarkable aspect of Deathworld predators, Professor Kellen continued, is their adaptability. Unlike civilized world species that evolve for specific environments, Deathworld creatures develop the ability to survive in multiple conditions. The hologram showed various Earth environments: deserts, forests, mountains, and polar regions. A single predator species from these worlds might be equally comfortable in freezing cold or burning heat. They eat whatever is available. They use any shelter they can find. This adaptability makes them nearly impossible to contain or control. Prism raised one crystalline appendage. Professor, surely these creatures lack intelligence? Raw adaptability must come at the cost of higher brain functions? Professor Kellen's expression grew more serious. Unfortunately, no. Deathworld conditions appear to select for both physical capability and mental development. The most successful Deathworld predators show problem-solving abilities that rival some civilized species. The professor activated another hologram, showing chimpanzees using tools to fish for termites. David watched his classmates react with visible horror as the chimps demonstrated planning, tool use, and social learning. These creatures modify objects to serve as tools, Professor Kellen explained. They teach these skills to their offspring. They work together to solve complex problems. Now imagine if such intelligence existed in a creature with the physical capabilities we discussed earlier. A student in the middle of the room made a sound like steam escaping from a pipe. Such a creature would be unstoppable. Precisely why we must study them, Professor Kellen replied. Knowledge of these theoretical limits helps us understand the boundaries of biological possibility. It also reminds us how fortunate we are that such creatures remain safely contained on their isolated death worlds. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He thought about his little sister, Sarah, who could solve complex math problems and also swim 5 kilometers without getting tired. He thought about his father, who had spent 20 years in the military and now taught kindergarten children with infinite patience. Were they monsters or just people shaped by their world? The lecture continued with more examples. David saw footage of octopi, dolphins, and ravens, all labeled as theoretical extreme predators from various fictional death worlds. Each example drove his classmates to higher levels of distress. The most terrifying theoretical possibility, Professor Kellen said, would be a deathworld predator that develops spaceflight capability. Such a species would combine physical dominance with technological advancement. They could spread beyond their homeworld and potentially threaten civilized space. Has such a thing ever happened? Asked a student whose body seemed to be made of flowing liquid. Professor Kellen paused thoughtfully. There are unconfirmed reports of survey ships disappearing near certain quarantined death worlds. However, the galactic consensus is that truly dangerous death world species lack the social cooperation necessary for technological development. Violence and intelligence may develop together, but they prevent the peaceful collaboration required for spaceflight. David almost laughed out loud. Humans had been cooperating on space projects for decades, while still maintaining armies and competitive sports. The idea that violence and cooperation were mutually exclusive showed how little the galaxy understood about his species. As the class ended, students filed out in small groups, their conversations focused on stress management and counseling appointments. David remained in his seat, watching the empty holographic space where images of Earth creatures had terrified his classmates. Professor Kellen approached him as he finally stood to leave. David, the professor said, I wanted to check on your comfort level with this material. As the only student from an outer rim world, you might find these concepts more disturbing than those raised in core civilization. David looked at the tall, graceful alien and felt a moment of genuine affection. Professor Kellen was trying to be kind, showing concern for what he assumed was a primitive student struggling with advanced concepts. I'm doing fine, Professor, David said. Actually, I find it all quite fascinating. The adaptability and intelligence of these theoretical creatures is remarkable. Professor Kellen's large eyes studied David's face carefully. You seem remarkably composed for someone encountering these concepts for the first time. Most students require several sessions before they can discuss Deathworld predators without emotional distress. Maybe growing up on a frontier world prepared me better than expected, David replied with a smile. As he walked back to his dormitory, David's mind churned with the day's revelations. His classmates lived in a galaxy where wolves were theoretical monsters and sharks were incomprehensible nightmares. They had never seen a human marathon runner, never watched a rock climber scale a cliff face, never witnessed a parent lift a car to save their child. Tomorrow he would start researching his assignment, the theoretical apex predators of Sol 3. He wondered what he would find when he looked up his own species in the galactic database. David sat alone in the research library, surrounded by holographic displays showing data that made his hands shake. 3 days of searching the galactic database had revealed the truth about how the galaxy saw humanity, and it was worse than he had imagined. The official classification glowed in red letters above his workstation: Sol 3, Earth, Class 12, Deathworld, Quarantine Level, Absolute. Below that, a long list of warnings and observations filled screen after screen with clinical descriptions of human capabilities that read like a horror story. Primary predator species, Homo sapiens. David read silently. Bipedal pursuit hunters with unprecedented endurance capabilities. Theoretical maximum pursuit range, unlimited. Prey capture method, exhaustion-based hunting over extended distances. Notable adaptations: opposable thumbs enable advanced tool use. Binocular vision provides exceptional depth perception. Omnivorous digestive system allows consumption of any organic matter. The database included video files marked as theoretical reconstructions based on probe data. David recognized them as normal human activities, but the commentary described them in terms that made his skin crawl. A video of the Boston Marathon was labeled PAC. Hunting formation, theoretical coordinated, pursuit lasting 42 kilometers. The runners' faces, focused and determined, were analyzed as predatory concentration during extended prey tracking. Another video showed a rock climbing competition. The commentary described it as theoretical mobile hunting adaptation. Primary predator demonstrates ability to pursue prey through three-dimensional terrain inaccessible to most life forms. David paused the playback and rubbed his temples. Every normal human activity had been cataloged and categorized as evidence of humanity's terrifying nature. A cooking show became food preparation ritual, apex predator, demonstrates omnivorous consumption patterns and advanced tool use. A chess tournament was described as tactical simulation exercises. Pack hunters practice strategic coordination. The psychological profile section was even worse. Species shows unusual emotional range, combining extreme aggression with capacity for extended social bonding. This paradox enables both individual violence and group cooperation on scales unknown in civilized space. Theoretical social units can coordinate actions involving millions of individual predators while maintaining emotional attachments to offspring for decades. "Hey, David," Chiric's voice interrupted his reading. The insect student approached, moving more carefully than usual. "How is your research going? I hope studying theoretical creatures is easier than dealing with real ones." David quickly closed the most disturbing files and turned to his friend. "It's been very educational. How are you handling your assignment?" Chiric's antennae drooped, poorly. "I have spent 2 days in counseling after viewing footage of aquatic predators. Did you know that some Deathworld creatures consume their prey while it is still alive? They do not have the courtesy to kill first as civilized predators do." David thought about sushi restaurants and decided not to mention them. "That does sound disturbing. Are you feeling better now?" "The counselors say I am making progress," Chiric replied. "They recommend limiting my research to 2 hours per day to prevent psychological damage. I am grateful my assignment is from a water world. Land predators are apparently much worse." As Chiric wandered off to find a less stressful study area, David returned to his research with growing amazement. The galaxy's knowledge of Earth was both incredibly detailed and completely misunderstood. They had accurate information about human physiology, culture, and behavior, but they interpreted everything through the lens of their own fears. The database showed that several unmanned probes had been sent to Earth over the past century. Most had been destroyed or gone missing, which the aliens interpreted as evidence of humanity's hostile nature. David realized that the missing probes had probably been found by various Earth governments and reverse-engineered to help develop faster-than-light Technology. The few probes that had returned provided extensive video footage of human activities. David found recordings of military exercises, sporting events, and even footage from nature documentaries showing humans interacting with Earth's wildlife. Every piece of evidence reinforced the aliens' conviction that humans were the galaxy's ultimate predators. A file labeled Social Structure Analysis contained footage from various human cities. The commentary described rush hour traffic as massive coordination of individual predators moving in synchronized patterns suggesting hive mind capabilities. A video of a concert was analyzed as group psychological conditioning pack. Leaders use acoustic manipulation to control large numbers of subordinates. David discovered that Earth's classification as a garden world was actually a deliberate deception. The first contact protocols had been carefully managed by a secretive group of galactic anthropologists who wanted to study humanity without triggering a panic. They had convinced the galaxy that Earth was a peaceful world and that humans were a developing species in need of guidance. The real survey data painted a very different picture. Earth's gravity was nearly 3 times higher than most civilized worlds. Its weather patterns were classified as catastrophically unstable. The presence of large predators, natural disasters, and toxic plant life marked it as one of the most hostile environments the galaxy had ever encountered. But the most classified files contained information that made David's blood run cold. Deep in the restricted database, he found strategic assessments of humanity's potential as a galactic threat. Recommendation: maintain current deception regarding Sol 3 classification, one report stated. Species shows signs of rapid technological development. If allowed to develop military applications of their natural capabilities, they could theoretically achieve dominance over civilized space within 1 generation. Another report was even more direct. Contingency protocols should be prepared for the possibility that Sol 3 predators achieve unrestricted spaceflight. Their combination of intelligence, aggression, and physical capability represents a theoretical extinction-level threat to galactic civilization. David leaned back in his chair and tried to process what he had learned. The galaxy was terrified of humanity, but they were also trying to guide human development to prevent them from becoming a threat. The exchange program wasn't just about education. It was an intelligence-gathering operation disguised as cultural outreach. Meanwhile, across the library, his classmates struggled with their own research. Prism had requested additional counseling after encountering footage of Earth's nocturnal predators. Another student had switched assignments entirely after discovering that some Deathworld creatures were capable of using fire as a tool. David made a decision that would change everything. Instead of revealing the truth immediately, he would play along with the deception. He would prepare his presentation exactly as assigned, describing the theoretical apex predators of Sol 3 with scientific accuracy and clinical detachment. Let his classmates learn about humanity from a human perspective. Let them understand what these monsters were really like when they chose to be friends instead of predators. He began preparing his presentation with care, selecting video footage that showed humans at their most impressive and most human. Marathon runners and mountain climbers, yes, but also parents teaching their children and communities working together in times of crisis. If the galaxy wanted to learn about Deathworld predators, David would make sure they got the complete picture. He would show them that the most dangerous creatures in the universe could also be the most compassionate, and that true strength sometimes meant choosing not to use the power you possessed. The presentation was going to be very educational for everyone involved. Professor Kellen walked through the research library during the quiet hours before dawn, checking on students who had requested extended access to the databases. The Deathworld Predator project always caused psychological strain, but this year seemed particularly difficult for some students. Near the back of the library, the professor found David still working at his terminal. The human student had been there for hours, completely absorbed in his research. What struck Professor Kellen as unusual was David's complete lack of stress symptoms. While other students showed clear signs of distress after exposure to Deathworld data, David appeared perfectly calm. "David," Professor Kellen said softly, approaching the workstation. "You have been here all night. Are you experiencing any difficulties with your research?" David looked up with clear, alert eyes. "Not at all, Professor. Actually, I find the subject fascinating. The more I learn about these theoretical creatures, the more impressed I become with their capabilities. Professor Kellen studied the human's face carefully. Most students at this stage showed nervous twitching, sleep disturbance, or appetite changes. David looked healthier than when the semester began. "May I see what you have discovered?" Professor Kellen asked, gesturing toward the displays. David hesitated for just a moment, then activated a holographic projection showing human endurance running. This species appears capable of maintaining pursuit speeds for distances that seem biologically impossible. Look at these readings. Elevated heart rate sustained for over 2 hours while covering more than 40 kilometers. Professor Kellen watched the footage with growing unease. The creatures in the video looked disturbingly similar to David himself, though the professor dismissed this as coincidence. Many species shared basic bipedal characteristics. Their tool use capabilities are remarkable, David continued, switching to footage of human construction projects. They can reshape entire planetary surfaces using coordinated group efforts. This footage shows them moving millions of tons of material to create artificial mountains. The professor watched humans building a dam and felt a chill of recognition. The coordination, the planning, the scale of the project. It suggested intelligence levels far beyond what should be possible for Deathworld predators. "David," Professor Kellen said carefully, "you seem remarkably well informed about these creatures. Your research has uncovered details that took our xenobiology teams decades to analyze." David smiled. "I guess I have a natural intuition for predator behavior. Growing up on a frontier world teaches you to think like a hunter." As Professor Kellen left David to continue his work, the professor's mind troubled by what had been observed. There was something about the human student that did not fit the expected patterns. While other students required counseling to cope with Deathworld imagery, David discussed the most terrifying predators in the galaxy, as if he were describing old friends. Meanwhile, across campus, David's classmates were struggling with their own research in very different ways. Chirrut sat in the counseling center, his compound eyes reflecting the soft, healing lights designed to reduce anxiety. The session was his 5th this week. "I keep having dreams about the aquatic predators," Chirrut told the counselor, a gentle creature whose species specialized in psychological healing. "In the dreams, I am swimming and something enormous pursues me through the water. It can smell my fear from kilometers away." The counselor's voice rippled with sympathetic harmonics. "These responses are normal when studying Deathworld creatures. Your mind is processing concepts that evolution never prepared it to handle. The predators you are researching represent biological impossibilities that challenge your understanding of how life should work." "How does David seem so unaffected?" Chirrut asked. "He studies the theoretical apex predators of Sol 3, which should be even more disturbing than aquatic hunters. Yet he appears more energetic than before we began this project." The counselor considered this question. Frontier world species sometimes show greater resilience to disturbing concepts. David's people may have retained some predator awareness instincts that help him process these ideas without trauma. In another part of campus, Prism sat in the crystal gardens that helped Shamari students maintain psychological balance. The research into shadow hunters had disrupted Prism's normal light reflection patterns, creating dark spots that indicated severe stress. Another shimmery student approached, their crystalline structure resonating with concern. "How are you managing the Deathworld research?" "Poorly," Prism admitted. "The shadow hunters I study are pure nightmare fuel. They can become invisible, strike without warning, and adapt their hunting methods based on their prey's behavior. But what disturbs me most is how the theoretical Sol 3 predators make even shadow hunters seem manageable by comparison." "What do you mean?" Prism's crystal structure flickered with nervous energy. "I accessed some of David's research files by accident yesterday. The theoretical creatures from his assignment are beyond anything in our database. They combine intelligence, endurance, tool use, and social coordination in ways that should be impossible. Surely they remain theoretical." "That is what troubles me," Prism replied. "David's research is so detailed, so accurate in its biological modeling, that it hardly seems theoretical at all. He describes their behavior patterns, their emotional ranges, their cultural development as if he had observed them directly. Back in the research library, David continued his work with growing amazement at what he was discovering about galactic civilization. The more he learned about his classmates' species, the more he understood why they found humans so terrifying. The Vrick Collective had evolved on a world with gravity 1/3 that of Earth, with no large predators and abundant food sources. Their entire evolutionary history involved cooperation and resource sharing. The concept of persistence hunting was as alien to them as breathing underwater would be to David. The Shamari had developed on a tidally locked world where survival depended on light management and careful energy conservation. They had never known scarcity, competition, or the need to pursue anything. Their crystalline bodies were beautiful, but fragile, designed for a world where violence was unnecessary. The Etherians, like Professor Kellen, came from a world of floating islands and gentle winds. They had evolved for grace and intelligence, with bodies too delicate for physical confrontation. Their entire species had developed around avoiding conflict rather than engaging it. To these species, humans represented everything their evolution had taught them to avoid. Earth was a world where everything competed with everything else, where survival required constant adaptation, where even the intelligent species had retained the instincts and capabilities of apex predators. David began to understand why the galaxy had chosen deception over direct contact. If they had announced humanity's true nature, it would have caused panic on a scale that could destabilize interstellar civilization. But the deception was becoming harder to maintain. As David prepared his presentation, he realized that he could not continue pretending these were theoretical creatures. His classmates deserved to know the truth, even if it frightened them. More importantly, David had grown genuinely fond of these aliens. Chirruk's cheerful curiosity, Prism's artistic nature, Professor Kellen's dedication to teaching. These were good people who had welcomed him as a friend. They had a right to know that the monster they were learning about was sitting in their classroom, caring about their well-being and wanting to protect them from nightmares. David made his final decision as he compiled the last files for his presentation. He would tell them everything, but he would do it in a way that showed them the human capacity for choice. He would prove that the galaxy's most feared predators could choose to be protectors instead of threats. The presentation would be in 3 days. David planned to make it the most important lecture in galactic history. The lecture hall buzzed with nervous energy as students and faculty gathered for the final presentations. Word had spread throughout the institute that this year's Deathworld Predator project had produced particularly disturbing research, and many professors had come to observe their colleagues' students cope with the psychological challenges. Chirruk entered the hall moving slowly, his usual quick chittering replaced by subdued clicks. 3 weeks of researching aquatic predators had left him noticeably changed, and his friends worried about his mental state. Prism floated to a seat near the back, their crystalline structure showing stress fractures that healing treatments had been unable to repair completely. The Shamari student had requested permission to present from behind a privacy screen to avoid triggering anxiety in other students. Professor Kellen stood at the front of the room, watching the students with concern. Several had required extended counseling, and 2 had withdrawn from the class entirely after psychological evaluations deemed them unfit to continue. The professor wondered if the assignment had been too ambitious for students this young. Near the middle of the hall, David sat quietly reviewing his presentation notes. Unlike his classmates, he showed no signs of stress or fatigue. If anything, he seemed more confident and composed than when the semester began. Professor Kellen had begun to suspect that David's frontier world origins might have given him natural resistance to disturbing concepts. We will begin with Chirruk's presentation on the aquatic predators of Aquanus, Professor Kellen announced. Chirruk moved to the front of the hall with obvious reluctance. His translator device buzzed with static, reflecting his emotional distress. The apex predators of Aquanus, Chirruk began, his voice shaking, represent evolutionary adaptations that challenge our understanding of biological possibility. The holographic display showed footage that David recognized as Earth's ocean predators, great white sharks, killer whales, and barracuda, but labeled with fictional planet designations. These creatures can detect electrical impulses from other life forms at distances exceeding 10 kilometers, Chirrut continued. They possess sensory capabilities that make concealment impossible. Worse, they appear to enjoy the hunt itself, playing with their prey before consumption. Several students in the audience made distress sounds. One Etherian student requested permission to leave the room. The most disturbing aspect, Chirrut said, his antennae trembling, is their complete lack of mercy. They show no recognition of surrender, no response to distress signals from their victims. They are biological machines designed solely for killing. David winced at this description of Earth's marine life. He thought about the dolphin rescue programs his sister volunteered for, or the great white shark conservation efforts that were helping restore ocean ecosystems. Chirrut was describing Earth's predators as emotionless killers, but David knew they were complex animals with their own social structures and behaviors. As Chirrut finished his presentation and returned to his seat with obvious relief, Professor Kellen called Prism forward. The Shamari student activated their privacy screen before beginning. Even through the translucent barrier, their stress was visible in the chaotic patterns of light reflecting through their crystalline structure. Shadow hunters of Umbros, Prism said, their voice distorted by the privacy screen, represent the ultimate stealth predators. They can become effectively invisible, striking without warning from any direction. The footage showed Earth's nocturnal predators, leopards, owls, and other night hunters, engaged in natural hunting behaviors. What makes them truly terrifying is their intelligence, Prism continued. They study their prey's behavior patterns, learning individual habits and preferences. They plan their attacks over extended periods, sometimes following the same target for days before striking. David realized that Prism was describing the patient observation skills that any good wildlife photographer would recognize as normal animal behavior. But to beings who had never faced natural predation, this planning ability seemed like malevolent intelligence. They show signs of emotional sadism, Prism added, their light patterns flickering with distress. They appear to derive pleasure from their victim's fear, prolonging the hunt unnecessarily. As Prism finished and returned to their seat, David could see the accumulated psychological impact the project had had on his classmates. Students throughout the hall showed signs of trauma from weeks of studying Earth's predators without understanding their true nature. Finally, Professor Kellen announced, David will present his research on the theoretical apex predators of Sol 3. David walked to the front of the hall, carrying himself with the easy confidence that his classmates had grown accustomed to over the semester. As he activated the holographic display, the entire audience leaned forward with anticipation and dread. The theoretical apex predators of Sol 3, David began, his voice calm and measured, represent what may be the most successful predator design in galactic history. The first hologram showed human runners in a marathon, their faces focused and determined as they moved across varied terrain. These creatures demonstrate unlimited endurance hunting capabilities, David explained. They can pursue prey across any distance in any weather until their target collapses from exhaustion. Notice their bipedal locomotion, which provides energy efficiency during extended pursuit, and their advanced cooling system that prevents overheating during long chases. Gasps echoed through the hall as students watched the human runners maintain their pace kilometer after kilometer. What David's classmates saw was a horrifying display of relentless pursuit. What David knew he was showing them was the Boston Marathon, complete with aid stations and cheering crowds. Their tool use capabilities exceed anything previously documented, David continued, switching to footage of human construction and engineering projects. They can reshape entire planetary surfaces to suit their needs. They create weapons, vehicles, and structures of unprecedented complexity. The audience watched humans building bridges, operating machinery, and constructing cities. To them, it looked like evidence of terrifying intelligence applied to dominating their environment. David knew he was showing them humanity's greatest achievements in cooperation and creativity. Perhaps most disturbing is their pack hunting behavior, David said, displaying footage of human teamwork. They can coordinate actions involving millions of individuals while maintaining individual autonomy. Each member of the pack specializes in different skills, making the group exponentially more dangerous than the sum of its parts. The footage showed everything from surgical teams to orchestra performances to space mission control centers. David's classmates saw nightmare scenarios of predator coordination, David saw the best examples of human cooperation and expertise. Their emotional range presents a unique paradox, David continued. They demonstrate capacity for extreme violence combined with deep emotional attachments to pack members. They will protect their young for decades, investing enormous resources in education and development. David showed footage of parents teaching children, teachers working with students, and medical professionals caring for patients. His audience interpreted this as evidence of sophisticated pack bonding that made the predators even more dangerous when threatened. They consume virtually any organic matter, David explained, showing footage from various restaurants and cultural food traditions around the world. They have developed complex preparation techniques that allow them to derive nutrition from otherwise toxic materials. Professor Kellen interrupted with a question. David, your research appears remarkably detailed. The behavioral analysis you present goes far beyond theoretical modeling. How did you obtain such specific information about these creatures? David paused, looking out at his classmates' terrified faces. Chirrut was trembling in his seat. Prism's light patterns had turned chaotic with fear. Even Professor Kellen showed signs of stress from the presentation. That brings me to the most important aspect of my research, David said quietly. These theoretical predators possess something that makes them more dangerous than any other species we've studied today. The hall fell completely silent. Students stopped their nervous movements. Professor Kellen leaned forward intently. They have the ability to choose, David continued. Unlike the other Deathworld predators we've examined, these creatures can decide when to hunt and when to show mercy. They can choose between violence and compassion, between taking what they want and helping others get what they need. David activated one final hologram, showing scenes of human kindness, rescue workers saving people from disasters, volunteers feeding the hungry, doctors treating patients in war zones, teachers working with disabled children. This is what makes them truly unique, David said. They have all the capabilities we've discussed, the endurance, the intelligence, the coordination, the adaptability, but they also have the wisdom to choose when and how to use those abilities. The audience sat in stunned silence, trying to process this new concept. The idea of a predator that could choose not to be predatory was beyond their previous understanding. Professor Kellen asked how I obtained such detailed information about these theoretical creatures. David said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. I should probably mention that these creatures aren't theoretical at all. Professor Kellen's eyes widened with sudden comprehension. Sol 3 is what we call Earth, David continued. And the apex predators I've been describing are what we call humans. The silence that followed was so complete that David could hear the building's ventilation systems humming in the walls. Every eye in the room focused on him with expressions ranging from disbelief to terror to fascination. I've been living among you for months, David said gently. I've attended your classes, studied in your library, worried about your stress levels during this project. I've been your friend and classmate not because I was hiding my nature, but because friendship is also part of that nature. David looked directly at Chirrut. You've been afraid of aquatic predators that show no mercy. But humans swim with dolphins for fun, and we spend billions of credits protecting shark populations from extinction. He turned to Prism. You've been terrified of shadow hunters who stalk their prey with sadistic pleasure. But human hunters follow strict ethical codes, and we only take what we need while working to preserve the natural balance. David faced the entire audience. Yes, we are apex predators. Yes, we evolved on a world that demanded strength, endurance, and adaptability. But we are also the species that chose to reach for the stars, to seek out other life, to learn from you and to offer friendship instead of dominance. The presentation timer chimed, indicating that David's time was complete. He stood quietly at the front of the hall, waiting for his classmates to process the revelation that would change their understanding of humanity forever. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. David stood at the front of the lecture hall, watching his classmates process the revelation that their friend was the apex predator they had been studying with such terror. Professor Kellen was the first to break the silence, their voice barely above a whisper. You are human. You are the theoretical Sol 3 predator. I am, David replied simply, and I've been your student, your friend, and your classmate this entire semester. Nothing about me has changed except your knowledge of what I am. Chirrut stood up suddenly, his compound eyes reflecting the room's lights in rapid, panicked patterns. "You could have killed any of us at any time," he said through his translator, his voice shaking with fear and something that might have been betrayal. David felt his heart break a little at the terror in his friend's voice. "Yes, I probably could have. Just like you could have poisoned me with compounds that would be harmless to your species but toxic to mine. Just like Prism could have blinded me with light patterns that would overload human vision. Just like Professor Kellen could have used their knowledge of human psychology to manipulate me into doing things against my will." He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many students as he could. "We all have the capability to hurt each other. The choice to be friends instead is what makes us civilized." A student near the back, one of the gaseous Aryans, spoke up with a voice like wind through crystal formations. "But the database shows that your species is violent, aggressive, and designed for killing. The database shows that my species evolved under conditions that required us to be capable of violence when necessary," David corrected. "But capability isn't the same as inevitability. Humans have been capable of ending all life on our planet for decades, but we chose not to. We have the ability to take whatever we want by force, but we chose to develop trade, diplomacy, and cooperation instead." Professor Kellen slowly approached the front of the room, studying David with new eyes. "The survey data from your world showed extensive military activity, competitive combat sports, and large-scale resource extraction operations." "All true," David admitted. "We maintain militaries because our world taught us that readiness prevents conflicts. We engage in combat sports because controlled competition satisfies aggressive instincts without causing real harm. We extract resources because 8 billion people need food, shelter, and energy to survive." David paused, seeing the confusion on his classmates' faces. "Professor, you've told us that civilized species solve problems through technology and cooperation. Humans do that too, but we learned to do it on a world where failure meant extinction. Our cooperation had to be stronger, our technology more robust, and our social bonds deeper because the stakes were higher." Prism's crystalline structure began to show less chaotic patterns as they processed David's words. "You are saying that your predator nature makes you more cooperative, not less?" "Exactly," David replied. "A human parent will fight anything to protect their child. But that same protective instinct makes them willing to work with former enemies if cooperation serves their family better than conflict. A human soldier will risk their life for strangers, because the pack bonding that made us successful hunters also makes us loyal to our communities." Chirrut slowly sat back down, though his posture remained tense. "But you could hurt us. The research shows that humans can run us down, outthink us, overpower us physically." "Chirrut," David said gently, "you could hurt me too. Your species has toxins that would kill me in minutes. Your knowledge of chemistry and biology far exceeds mine. If you wanted to harm me, you could do it easily, and I might never know what hit me." He addressed the entire class. "Every species in this room has capabilities that could be used to harm others. The Etherians have psychological manipulation abilities. The Shimari can create light patterns that cause seizures in other species. The Aryans can alter atmospheric composition in ways that would suffocate most of us." Professor Kellen nodded slowly. "You are correct. We all have dangerous capabilities. The difference is that other species evolved past the need to use them." "Did you?" David asked. "Or did you evolve on worlds where you never needed to develop them fully? There's a difference between being peaceful because you chose to be, and being peaceful because you never faced circumstances that required anything else." David activated his presentation remote one more time, showing images from Earth's history, hospitals, schools, rescue operations, environmental conservation efforts, and space programs. "These are also human activities," he said. "We build hospitals to heal our enemies after we've defeated them. We spend enormous resources educating children for decades before they become productive adults. We risk our lives to save people we've never met from natural disasters. We work to preserve the environments and species that our expansion threatens." The images shifted to show the human space program, international cooperation, peaceful exploration, scientific research shared freely across borders, and we reached for the stars not to conquer them, but to learn from them. When we received first contact from your civilizations, our immediate response was to seek cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, and peaceful coexistence. An Etherian professor who had been observing from the back of the room floated forward. but the galactic database shows that humans engage in regular warfare among themselves. We do, David admitted. But we also have international laws governing warfare, medical services that treat wounded enemies, and prisoner exchange programs. Even in our conflicts, we maintain rules about protecting civilians and preserving cultural sites. David looked directly at Professor Kellen. Professor, you asked earlier what makes Deathworld predators so dangerous. I think the real answer is that we're not dangerous because we're predators. We're unique because we're predators who chose to become something more. He gestured toward his classmates. Every species in this room represents a different solution to the challenge of survival. You developed beyond the need for individual violence by creating stable environments and abundant resources. Humans developed beyond the need for violence by learning to channel our aggressive capabilities into protection, competition, creativity, and exploration. Chirrut raised one of his forearms hesitantly. David, you have been my friend this semester. You helped me with my research, brought me food when I was too stressed to eat, and never showed any signs of aggressive behavior. Because you were my friend, David replied simply. You showed kindness to a stranger from a distant world. You shared your culture, your knowledge, and your fears with me. Why would I want to hurt someone who treated me with such generosity? The hall remained quiet as students processed this revelation. Finally, Professor Kellen spoke again. David, your presentation suggests that humans represent not just apex predators, but apex predators who have learned to coexist peacefully with other species. Is this accurate? It's what we're trying to become, David answered honestly. We're not perfect. We still make mistakes, still sometimes choose conflict over cooperation, still struggle with our own nature, but we're trying to be worthy of the friendship and trust that beings like you have offered us. David gathered his presentation materials. I hope this project has taught all of us something important about judging others based on their capabilities rather than their choices. Every species has the potential for both creation and destruction. What matters is what we choose to do with that potential. As he prepared to leave the podium, Chirrut stood up again. David, are you still willing to be my friend? Even though I know what you are now? David smiled, the same warm expression his classmates had seen throughout the semester. Chirrut, I'm willing to be your friend because I know what you are. A curious, intelligent, kind being who worries about others and works hard to understand the universe around you. Nothing I learned about your species' capabilities changed how I felt about you as a person. Professor Kellen stepped forward as the formal presentation period ended. David, this has been the most educational presentation in my career. You have given us much to think about regarding the nature of strength, civilization, and friendship. The professor addressed the entire class. I believe we have all learned that the most dangerous predator in the galaxy may also be capable of becoming its most valuable ally. The question now becomes how we choose to respond to this knowledge. As students began to file out of the hall, many stopped to speak with David. Some were still nervous, but others showed curiosity and even admiration. Prism approached last, their crystalline structure now showing stable, thoughtful patterns. David, Prism said, I have a question. If humans are as powerful as the research suggests, why do you seek our friendship? What do you gain from beings who are weaker than you? David considered the question seriously. Prism, you create art that captures light in ways that bring joy to everyone who sees it. Chirrut's people have developed medicine that eliminates suffering from diseases that have plagued other species for millennia. Professor Kellen's species has insights into consciousness and philosophy that help us understand what it means to be truly alive. He looked around at the diverse gathering of alien students. We don't seek your friendship because we gain power from it. We seek it because you make us better than we could ever be alone. A galaxy where humans are the strongest would be a poorer place than a galaxy where all of us work together to become something greater than any single species could achieve. As the hall finally emptied, Professor Kellen remained behind with David. What happens now? The professor asked. How does the galaxy integrate this knowledge about humanity? David picked up his bag and smiled. The same way this classroom did, I hope. One friendship at a time with patience, understanding, and the courage to see each other as individuals rather than stereotypes. He paused at the door. Professor, thank you for creating a space where we could all learn from each other. That's the most human thing anyone could do, regardless of their species. As David walked out into the alien city that had become his temporary home, He carried with him the hope that the galaxy's most feared predator had just taken the first step toward becoming its most trusted friend.